What if I told you that hidden in the soil of America's past are vegetables so powerful, so resilient, that they helped entire families survive the darkest chapter of modern history, the Great Depression? Back then, money was scarce, store shelves were bare, and every meal depended on what you could grow in your own backyard. But here's the twist: our grandparents didn't just grow the common potatoes, corn, or beans we think of today. They had a secret lineup of tough, forgotten vegetables, plants that could laugh in the face of drought, survive the coldest winters, and feed hungry mouths when all else failed. These weren't just foods, they were lifelines. Take the humble rutabaga, nicknamed the poor man's potato, or the massive mangel, a root so big it could feed both families and livestock through the long winter. Imagine pulling a parsnip from the frozen ground in January and tasting its unexpected sweetness, or digging up Jerusalem artichokes that had been waiting underground all season like nature's hidden treasure. Each of these forgotten crops carried stories of mothers stretching meals to keep children full, of fathers planting rows at dusk after long days of work, and of entire families gathering around the table with gratitude, even when times were lean. These vegetables weren't just survival food, they were symbols of resilience, ingenuity, and hope. Today, most of us have never even heard their names. But if we want to understand the real story of how our grandparents endured, we need to rediscover them. So, join me as we dig up the 10 forgotten vegetables that helped families survive the Great Depression. And if you love stories of food, history, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe, because this journey into America's forgotten gardens is just beginning. Part 01: Rutabaga, the poor man's potato. In the heart of the Great Depression, when cupboards were nearly bare and store-bought food was a rare luxury, one humble root vegetable quietly became a hero: the rutabaga. Families often called it the poor man's potato, but in truth, it was far more than that. Unlike the common potato, rutabagas carried a secret strength: they were packed with vitamin C, even more than oranges. At a time when fresh fruit was nearly impossible to afford, this earthy root helped keep families healthy through long winters, protecting them from illness when medical care was out of reach. But nutrition wasn't its only gift. Rutabagas had an incredible ability to last. With nothing more than a cool root cellar, these tough vegetables stayed fresh for 4 to 6 months, long after other food supplies had disappeared. That kind of reliability meant peace of mind for parents who worried about how to feed their children through the bitter cold. Even more remarkable was how easily rutabagas grew. They didn't demand rich soil or perfect weather. In fact, they thrived where other crops struggled. Families could plant them in late summer, confident they'd have a dependable harvest before frost set in. When hard times made every seed count, rutabagas rarely let anyone down. Around kitchen tables, these golden-fleshed roots were boiled, mashed, roasted, or mixed into hearty stews. They stretched meals, filled empty stomachs, and turned scraps into something comforting. For many children growing up in the 1930s, the taste of rutabaga wasn't just food, it was survival. So while history may have overlooked them, the rutabaga deserves its place among the quiet champions of the Depression era. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, nourishing, and dependable, the kind of food that kept hope alive when everything else felt uncertain. Part 02: Mangel, the giant that fed America. In the struggling kitchens of Depression-era America, size truly mattered, and nothing loomed larger than the mangel. At first glance, it looked like a beet on steroids, but this root could grow as heavy as 20 pounds, earning it the reputation of a garden giant. For families who measured survival in calories, the mangel was a blessing. Unlike smaller vegetables that disappeared quickly, a single root could stretch into multiple meals, filling plates when cupboards were almost empty. Its natural sweetness made it versatile too, baked like a potato, boiled in soups, or sliced thin and pan-fried. It brought warmth and comfort to dinner tables that rarely saw abundance. But its importance went beyond feeding people. In those desperate years, livestock was often the difference between life and starvation. Families discovered that mangles could also sustain their animals through harsh winters. Chickens, pigs, and cows fed on this giant root, ensuring milk, eggs, and meat remained available even when money was scarce. One crop was feeding both the family and the farm, an efficiency that made it priceless. Storage was another hidden strength. With nothing more than a dirt cellar or a cool corner of the barn, these massive roots lasted for months, quietly waiting to be used. At a time when refrigeration was rare, the ability to preserve food naturally gave families hope that tomorrow's meals were secure. Though nearly forgotten today, the mangelwurzel once symbolized resilience. It wasn't fancy, it was earthy, oversized, and sometimes tough to peel, but it carried people through times when options were few. In every steaming pot of soup or shared family meal, the giant root whispered the same promise: you will make it through the winter. Part 03: Salsify, the oyster plant that grew on land. During the Great Depression, when food was plain and luxuries were almost impossible to find, one strange root vegetable gave families a taste of something unexpected: salsify. Known as the oyster plant, this humble root carried a flavor that reminded people of the sea, even though it grew in the soil of backyard gardens. For struggling families, salsify wasn't just food, it was comfort. A dish made from salsify could transform an ordinary supper into something that felt special, almost indulgent. Its creamy, oyster-like taste was a reminder of better times, when meals weren't dictated by scarcity. Fried, mashed, or simmered in soups, it added richness to tables that rarely saw variety. But salsify's value wasn't only in its flavor. It was one of the most practical survival crops of its time. Unlike vegetables that spoiled quickly, salsify could simply be left in the ground all winter long. Families didn't need fancy storage, they could dig up the roots whenever they needed them, even in the middle of January. It was like having a natural pantry built right into the earth. Even more remarkable, salsify was a two-in-one plant. The roots provided nourishment, but the leafy tops were just as useful, cooked and served like spinach. Nothing went to waste, and every part of the plant carried its weight in feeding hungry mouths. In an era when ingenuity meant survival, salsify stood out as both clever and dependable. It wasn't grown for its beauty, but for its resilience and its rare ability to make poverty feel just a little less harsh. For families facing the uncertainty of tomorrow, the oyster plant wasn't just a vegetable, it was a small taste of hope. Part 04: Jerusalem artichokes, the Native American survivor. Long before the Great Depression, Native Americans had already unlocked the secret of a root that could outlast hunger: the Jerusalem artichoke. When the 1930s brought hardship, families rediscovered this incredible plant, and it quickly became one of the smartest survival foods of the era. What made Jerusalem artichokes so valuable was their persistence. Unlike most vegetables that had to be replanted every year, these were perennials, meaning once you planted them, they returned on their own season after season. For families with limited money for seeds, that reliability was a lifeline. Beneath the soil, the knobby roots hid a mild sweetness, thanks to a natural sugar called inulin. Boiled, roasted, or mashed, they offered a flavor that felt surprisingly comforting when meals were otherwise bland. Even more important, they were available exactly when families needed them most, through the coldest months. While other crops rotted or froze, Jerusalem artichokes could be dug up from the frozen ground, one meal at a time. Their usefulness didn't stop there. Left alone, the plant spread and multiplied, turning a small patch into a never-ending food supply. Families could eat what they needed and leave the rest underground, knowing there would be even more the following year. In a world of uncertainty, Jerusalem artichokes quietly promise security. For Depression-era parents, these roots weren't glamorous, but they were dependable. Children might have teased their odd, knobby shapes, but every bite meant another day of nourishment. They carried the legacy of Native American wisdom, proving that the best survival foods often come straight from tradition. In every way, the Jerusalem artichoke was more than a vegetable, it was a survivor, growing stronger with each season, just like the families who depended on it. Part 05: Winter Radishes, the giants that protected gardens. When we think of radishes today, we picture those tiny, red, peppery roots that add a quick crunch to salads. But during the Great Depression, families weren't planting dainty salad radishes, they turned to the giants of the garden, winter radishes. These roots grew to the size of turnips, sometimes weighing several pounds each. For families struggling to stretch every meal, their size alone made them invaluable. A single winter radish could be sliced, stewed, or grated into dishes that fed an entire household. Nothing went to waste. Even the leafy tops were boiled or fried like spinach, bringing vital greens to the table when fresh vegetables were scarce. But winter radishes carried another hidden strength that made them especially prized. They acted as natural protectors in the garden. Their strong scent and deep roots helped keep pests away, shielding neighboring crops like carrots, beans, and cabbages. For gardeners who couldn't afford sprays or treatments, these radishes were like living guardians, defending the food supply with every leaf and root. Storage was yet another gift. In simple root cellars, or even buried under straw, winter radishes stayed crisp for months, ensuring a steady supply of food deep into winter. Their sharp flavor mellowed as they aged, making them more versatile in soups, stir-fries, and pickled dishes. For children of the 1930s, the taste of winter radishes wasn't just about flavor, it was about survival. Each bite carried the assurance that tomorrow's meals were secure, that even in hardship, nature had provided. Though largely forgotten today, these giant radishes were once symbols of resilience, vegetables that not only fed families but protected the very gardens they grew in. In the toughest times, they stood tall, bold, and unyielding, just like the people who depended on them. Part 06: Parsnips, Nature's Sugar Factory. On most farms during the Great Depression, vegetables were measured not just by how filling they were, but by how much joy they could bring. And parsnips, pale, carrot-like roots, had a magical secret. After the first frost touched them, something remarkable happened: their starches transformed into natural sugars. Suddenly, an ordinary root became nature's candy. For families who couldn't afford store-bought sugar, parsnips were a godsend. Their sweet flavor brightened meals that were otherwise plain and repetitive. Roasted until golden, mashed into creamy sides, or sliced into soups, they brought comfort and warmth to tables that had seen too many lean suppers. Children who grew up in the 1930s often remembered parsnips as the closest thing to a treat they had in the winter months. But sweetness wasn't the only reason they mattered. Parsnips were calorie-rich, far more than carrots or even potatoes. In a time when energy was survival, this meant parsnips could keep hard-working families going through freezing winters and long days of labor. Even better, they came with their own natural storage system. Gardeners could leave parsnips right in the ground all winter, letting the earth act as a cellar. Whenever food was needed, families simply dug up a few roots, even through frozen soil, and the rest stayed fresh underground until spring. Many farmers even marked their parsnip rows with tall stakes, so they could find them under blankets of snow. For Depression-era families, parsnips weren't just another crop, they were a symbol of hope in cold months. A vegetable that grew sweeter with hardship, just like the people who ate them. In every bite of their honey-like flavor, there was a reminder, sometimes, even in the harshest seasons, life has a way of giving back. Part 07, Hamburg-rooted parsley, the two-in-one wonder. In the Great Depression, every seed planted had to work twice as hard. Families couldn't afford just a garnish or just a side dish, they needed plants that could do it all. And that's where Hamburg-rooted parsley earned its place as a quiet but powerful survivor. Unlike the parsley we sprinkle over meals today, this variety grew a large, pale root beneath the soil. That root was hearty, earthy, and full of nutrition, something that could be boiled, roasted, or added to stews to stretch meals when food was scarce. With a root cellar, families could store them all winter long, giving peace of mind that a dependable supply of food was waiting, even when gardens lay frozen. Above ground, the plant offered a second gift: parsley leaves. Fresh, fragrant, and packed with vitamin C, more than many fruits, these greens could brighten even the simplest dishes. Families harvested them all summer long, using them fresh, drying them for later, or adding them to soups for flavor and nutrition during the cold months. This two-in-one design made Hamburg-rooted parsley priceless. One row in the garden produced both fresh greens for immediate meals and sturdy roots for the long haul. Nothing was wasted, and every part of the plant pulled its weight. In kitchens of the 1930s, it became the kind of food that quietly stitched meals together. A pot of stew flavored with its leaves, thickened with its roots, might not have been fancy, but it was filling, nourishing, and dependable. Today, Hamburg-rooted parsley is nearly forgotten, but in the era of hardship, it symbolized exactly what families needed: versatility, resilience, and the ability to turn one seed into double the survival. Part 08, Turnips, the 6-week savior. In the hungry years of the Great Depression, time was just as valuable as money. Families couldn't afford to wait months for food to grow, which is why turnips became one of the most dependable crops of the era. Known as the 6-week savior, turnips could go from seed to harvest in less than 2 months, faster than almost any other staple. This speed made them a lifesaver. If drought ruined one crop or pests destroyed another, there was still time to plant turnips and secure food before winter set in. Families who planted rows of turnips knew they would never go long without something to eat. But turnips weren't just quick, they were tough. These hardy roots thrived even in poor soil and with little water, making them one of the most reliable vegetables for struggling farmers. No matter how harsh the season, turnips found a way to grow. Every part of the plant was put to use. The roots could be boiled, mashed like potatoes, or sliced into hearty stews. They stored well in simple root cellars, staying firm for months. Meanwhile, the leafy greens were just as valuable. Packed with vitamins and minerals, they were cooked like collards or added fresh to soups, giving families a steady supply of nutrition long after other garden vegetables had faded. Many families planted turnips several times a year, some for fresh eating, some for winter storage, and some just for the greens. That constant cycle meant a near-endless supply of food from a single, simple seed. For Depression-era households, the turnip wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. It grew fast, grew strong, and gave more than it took, just like the people who planted it. Part 09, Collard Greens, the soulful survivor. In the depths of the Great Depression, collard greens became more than just food, they became a symbol of survival. Known for their tough, broad leaves and deep green color, collards thrived where other vegetables failed. They could endure poor soil, resist drought, and survive in both heat and frost, making them a year-round source of nourishment. Families turned to collards because they delivered both quantity and quality. A single patch could be harvested over and over, as the leaves were picked from the outside while the plant continued to grow. Unlike fragile vegetables that withered quickly, collards were steady providers, always ready, always reliable. But collard greens carried more than just calories, they carried history. For generations in the American South, collards were already a staple, tied to traditions of resilience among farming families and communities who knew how to make the most of what little they had. During the Depression, those traditions became lifelines. Pots of simmering collards, often flavored with nothing more than salt, a dash of vinegar, or a scrap of smoked meat, brought both warmth and nourishment to the table. Nutritionally, collards were a powerhouse. Packed with vitamins A, C, and K, along with iron and calcium, they helped keep families strong when diets were limited and varied foods were hard to come by. The greens could be boiled, stewed, or even wilted in a skillet, stretching into meals that fed large families from small gardens. For many, collard greens represented persistence. They didn't demand rich soil or special care, they just kept growing, season after season, even when times were harsh. In their strength and simplicity, collards mirrored the spirit of the people who depended on them, unyielding, resourceful, and rooted in tradition. Part 10: Potatoes, the Underground Lifeline. When the Great Depression struck, one humble vegetable quietly became a cornerstone of survival: the potato. Hidden beneath the soil, these tubers were both dependable and abundant, feeding families who faced empty pantries and dwindling incomes. Unlike many crops, potatoes required little maintenance and yielded large harvests from even small garden plots. For struggling households, that meant security, food they could count on. Potatoes weren't just filling, they were endlessly versatile. They could be boiled, mashed, fried, baked, or turned into hearty stews, providing variety in meals when options were scarce. Leftover potatoes were never wasted. Cold mashed potatoes could become pancakes, while skins could be crisped for snacks. Nothing went unused. Nutritionally, potatoes offered more than comfort. They provided vital carbohydrates for energy, along with potassium, vitamin C, and fiber. In a time when diets were often stripped of fresh produce, the potato helped prevent deficiencies and kept families nourished through lean months. Perhaps their greatest gift was storage. Unlike delicate vegetables that spoiled quickly, potatoes could be cellared for months in cool, dark spaces. Families who harvested enough in summer could rely on them throughout the long winter, making potatoes a true lifeline against hunger. Emotionally, too, potatoes carried weight. A steaming bowl of mashed potatoes on a cold night or a skillet of fried potatoes sizzling for breakfast reminded families of comfort, stability, and the hope of better days. They bridged the gap between scarcity and survival with their quiet resilience. In the story of Depression-era gardens, the potato stands as a final reminder: survival wasn't about luxury, it was about endurance. And few vegetables embodied endurance better than this underground staple, which fed both body and spirit when America needed it most.